Another round of elections is just around the corner in Illinois. This time, mayors, school board members, and nonpartisan city councils are on the ballot. But how nonpartisan are they really? From Capital News, Illinois, it's Friday, March 21st. I'm Peter Hancock, and this is Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. On April 1st, just a little more than a week away, voters in Illinois will elect mayors, city council members or aldermen, and representatives on their local school boards. Ostensibly, these are supposed to be nonpartisan elections, and one way you can tell is the candidates are not chosen in Democratic or Republican primaries. But more and more, political parties and partisan-backed organizations are getting involved in these races. So is this just a symptom of today's current hyper-partisan environment, or is this a new reality that's here to stay? To help us answer that question is my colleague, Ben Szalinski, who wrote about this trend recently. Ben, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And also with us today is John Jackson, a political scientist and visiting professor at the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. John, welcome back.
Glad to be with you, Peter.
So, Ben, you wrote a story recently. The Democratic Party of Illinois actually officially announced that they were getting involved in municipal and mayoral races. What's the thinking behind that decision?
Yeah, the Democratic Party is really trying to expand their operations beyond just what is happening over the first few election cycles between general elections, presidential elections, governor's races. They're looking to get involved all the time, every single election, even if it's what these races are, nonpartisan races. So they believe that there's a lot of conservative influence that is starting to come into some of these elections, at the school board level, the mayoral level, and they think they need to fight back because, all politics is local and these are big issues that people are up against. And essentially, they're looking for a way to promote candidates that have Democrat values, believe in a lot of the same things that they believe in, and really ensure that Illinois is completely dominated by Democrats and that there is no room for Republicans to feel totally comfortable in election races.
So one thing I had always heard, even when I was covering local government, was that there's no such thing as a Republican pothole or a Democratic pothole. If there's a pothole in the street, it just needs to get fixed. Are we actually seeing more partisan types of issues coming up at city councils? Or is this just a way of maybe the parties trying to groom candidates for higher office later?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. One area is certainly they are grooming candidates. They launched a huge recruitment effort last summer where they recruited more than 1,000 people who could possibly run for some type of office here in Illinois. And some areas, though, we are seeing a partisan influence. Some of these partisan issues are coming up at the local level. I think there's kind of two different tales here. One, we see a lot of partisan conversation in school boards, for example, over education policy and things like that. But ultimately, one area where the Democrat Party feels like they've seen partisan influence is in the city of Aurora is one of their biggest examples. They are backing an alderman who is running against Richard Irvin, the longtime incumbent mayor of the city of Aurora, who ran as a Republican candidate.
Ran for governor in the GOP primary a few years ago, hoping to run against Governor J.B. Pritzker, but did not get the GOP nomination.
Exactly. So they're like, well, we have an obviously Republican candidate because the mayor admitted to it, even though he holds a nonpartisan office. So they believe that Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin is basically a Republican lawmaker. He doesn't, have a lot of distance from other Republicans, including Donald Trump. And, they believe this is an opportunity where people in Aurora are going to believe that their government is being run by a Republican. So they need to get involved with a candidate who they think is like-minded for Democrats.
Okay, so your story also focused in on some school board races. There are some conservative groups, GOP-backed groups. that are getting behind slates of candidates, and some of these candidates even openly identify as Republicans when they file to run for office. So what's going on there? What are the issues that they're trying to rally around?
Yeah, we took a look at the school board race in Morton, which is in Tazewell County outside of Peoria. And what we found is that there are 4 candidates who registered with the State Board of Elections as Republicans, even though this is a nonpartisan race. They're appearing on the ballot as independents, like everybody else who runs for local office appears on the ballot. But we found that there's a lot of Republican influence in this race. There is the Tazewell County Republican group. They are supporting these 4 candidates very openly. They're trying to, it's a they select 4 candidates in this race, and there's 5 candidates on the board. So there's been a lot of open campaigning against one particular person who is running for school board in that same district. And one of the big issues, it seems to me, in school board races, not just in Morton, but around the state of Illinois, is always about, the role of LGBTQ rights in schools, education. Book bans has been an issue in previous elections, how transgender kids should be handled in the locker room. And we're seeing that be one of these major issues in Morton, where the one candidate who is not officially backed by the Republican Party is basically being chastised for her position on these sort of issues, even though she really hasn't spoken out too much regarding LGBTQ rights in schools. So that's kind of how we see the Republicans framing elections, even though these are nonpartisan races. They inject this very partisan issue into it.
Okay, so let's turn now to Professor John Jackson from SIU Carbondale. These are supposed to be nonpartisan races. First of all, why is that? Why have we, as a matter of law, decided that school boards and cities should be nonpartisan while it's okay to be partisan in other kinds of races?
Well, the quote is originally from Tip O'Neill, or he gets credit for it, that all politics is ultimately local. And I think that was true back in that day, but it's no longer true today. It's all politics is more national now than ever before. And I think, interestingly enough, the Richard J. Daley machine was the forerunner, because everybody always knew that even though the labels weren't on the ballot, who the Republican delegation or slate was and who the Democratic slate was. And so that was the old machine politics. Now it's migrated to small cities, and it's migrated to the rural areas, and it's because of deep polarization that is true, whether the name's on the ballot and indicator or not. The reality is that deeply polarized partisan system we have now has come home to the smallest school boards and library boards and city councils, whether they're partisan or nonpartisan. It's just a fact of life, because both parties are trying to excite their base and mobilize their base. And that's the way you do it with these particularly high-profile issues, some of which Ben touched upon. And the Republicans have had a real advantage on this. They got out first with particularly some mobilization from the Koch Foundation and their organization. And the conservatives have really taken the lead on this for the last, I'd say, 10 years at least. The Democrats are playing catch up, and they're doing the best they can to get back in the game. And I think with a strong grassroots uprising against the Trump administration in some quarters, they've got a chance to at least get back in the game, whether they can catch up or not.
Yeah, now, you mentioned the Daley machine in Chicago, and Chicago is not the only major city that has had Democratic machine politics. There was the old Tammany Hall in New York, Mayor
Boston.
Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia. I mean, there have been a lot of them. It seems like Democrats were really good at doing this for a long time.
They were.
At least in the big cities, and not maybe so much in the smaller cities. How is it migrating down to even smaller cities like the size of Aurora, or even smaller cities than that?
Well, it's no longer about fixing potholes. That I've heard that saying that you used, but if it were about fixing potholes, the Democrats would still be doing fine. But it's migrated to the culture wars, and the culture wars have mobilized the base of the Republican Party, and the MAGA movement is a part of that. And the Democrats are trying to figure out what to do to counteract it. But if it were bread and butter, the Democrats would be fine. But it's about these high-profile cultural issues. And I think immigration, for example, at the national level has trickled down to the local level. Every local sheriff and every Republican in these rural areas, or particularly in states around us where we get news from Missouri and Kentucky and so forth, are eager to get out front and be tough on immigration. And that sort of thing is made to order, and it mostly leaves that bread and butter stuff behind.
So I asked at the beginning whether this is just a symptom of the kind of politics we're living through right now with those particular issues like immigration and LGBTQ rights, or is this just the new reality that we're going to live in from now on?
Well, I think it's a symptom, but I also think more importantly, it's long term. We're not going to go back. This is going to be here for a long time, certainly as long as Donald Trump and his acolytes, the MAGAs, are around. But cultural wars and all the attendant other related issues are just going to be here. We've never been this polarized, and it's not going to change anytime soon.
And I guess finally, I wanted to ask you whether or not you think, is this healthy for democracy? Or should there be some area of public life and in government that is outside of politics that is just about fixing potholes and making sure that stoplights work and those sorts of things? Is this healthy for democracy to nationalize all of our local politics?
No, I don't think it's necessarily very good for democracy at all. It's a knee-jerk kind of thing. It's a knee-jerk reaction to what is reality, what are the facts of the matter, what is a rational analysis, say at the state level of trying to figure out what's the best thing for the state to do about very practical problems. It ought to be about making public policy. It ought to be about respect for empirical research on what are the pluses and minuses, what are the program analysis of how this program is working. But much of that has just been lost in the noise and the sheer untruths that are out there that many, many millions of people apparently buy into and believe in.
Okay. Well, listen, we're going to have to leave it at that for this edition of Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with significant funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Until next time, this is Peter Hancock on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team. Thank you for listening.